Welcome to the Community of Excellence podcast, where lived experience leads the way. I'm your host, Nil Suner, and together we'll be exploring powerful conversations at the heart of mental health, recovery, and peer support.
Hope for a generation, just beyond my reach, not beyond my sight. Hope for a generation.
Hi, welcome to Community of Excellence podcast. I'm Nil Suner, and I have Dave Burnside today here, who is lived experience lead at Odyssey in Auckland, New Zealand. So we are living through completely different sections of the day, which is always exciting. And we'll talk about how peer support work happens in New Zealand and specifically in Odyssey, and a bit about drug and alcohol peer support and peer support in courts. Welcome, Dave. How are you?
Kia ora from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm very good, thanks.
So let's start with having a little bit of information about, first of all, what Odyssey provides in New Zealand, how peer support appears around the place in New Zealand, and then a little bit about your journey and what you do, how long you've been involved in peer support.
Okay, so a little bit about me. I mean, I come from a lived experience of mental health distress, addiction, particularly homelessness, and incarceration. I spent many years in jails and institutions over the years, and I've been in active recovery for about 16 and a half years. I actually found recovery in the prison system, and it wasn't the program. I was in the drug treatment unit. It wasn't the program. It was actually for peer support. Someone connected with me, someone who was in recovery, and lit the spark of hope in me. And that's the essence of what we do today. My job is to light the spark of hope and connect with people. So I came out of prison about 13, 14 years ago the last time. I've been there for quite some time. And I got a job with Odyssey in Auckland. And that first job was as a peer support worker in the drug court. So the drug court is a multi-agency initiative, just Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Health, all these stakeholders. It's a bit of a monster, but it's different. It's therapeutic jurisprudence, solution-focused justice. And it was really amazing to walk alongside people, some of whom I knew from the prison system, and just role model recovery to them. So I spent about 5 years in that team, and I moved up through the organisation. I've been there for 12 years now, and into a consumer role, consumer advisor, a management facing role. And these days I'm the lived experience lead, and I sit in the executive, and I oversee about 25 peer and consumer roles across the organisation in a variety of settings. So we have peers that work in therapeutic community settings. We have peers that work in the courts, in the drug courts. We have peers that work in the prison, usually within the therapeutic community within the prison. We have peers in youth settings. We have peers in recovery cafe and a range of other settings, and that's just at Odyssey. So peer support in New Zealand can look very different in mental health and what we would call kaupapa Māori or Indigenous approaches in all sorts of different settings. And but generally the idea is the same, is to role model recovery, to walk alongside people and to light that spark of hope. So what we really want to do is help people find their own, to empower themselves and do recovery on their terms. So we don't tell people what to do. We don't judge them for what we do. We just tell them what we've done, and hopefully that's got some value for them. And in all those different settings, mostly you're working as part of a multidisciplinary team. You're working alongside clinicians and managers and admin people, support workers, cultural roles, all these different things. So it's very important that we all understand each other. That's one of the big challenges for peer support that we find here in New Zealand, is what we call a lack of role clarity. Not many people actually know what we do, and really
That
understand.
sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think often it's the manager needs to understand how to deploy us. We're very effective in those transition stages when people come in, and we just connect with people, and our message is, hey, it's safe to give it a go. It's worked for me, maybe it can work for you. And that helps get engagement for our clinical colleagues and other roles. And then we come in at that other transition, particularly at the end as people are coming out, and we show them how coming out of the bubble of treatment or engagement with a service looks like, and how we connect into communities. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Just on, we'll move on, we'll follow on that conversation. But when you talked about lack of clarity, that is something we struggle on a day-to-day basis in the UK as well. And I was in a mental health conference in a lived experience match in Utrecht last summer, where a lot of colleagues from New Zealand were there, Australia, Canada, United States of America, Ireland, Belgium, Norway. You get the picture. Majority of our headline problems, without going into detail, are almost 95% the same problem. And lack of job role is one of it, definitely. Do you think lack of clarity of the role comes from not being familiar with peer support or not fitting in the existing system, which is probably based on very rigid descriptions, job descriptions that ties into old-fashioned way of measurable training, quantifiable training, or alternatively, one more scenario, and then I'll leave that to you. Sometimes I also think that we have left valuing experience professionally so long. We assumed or treated professions like that something can be created in each individual by the same training, by the same way. And we left the experience component out for so long that we are finding it difficult to come to grips with it. What would you say?
Well, look, it's quite complex, really. And I suppose, in a way, we're not a natural fit within existing treatment services. Sometimes you'll have a service that is just peer support, but as soon as you have a therapeutic community or anywhere where clinicians are operating, we're not a natural fit. Our philosophies are different. So we've done a lot of research on this, and I know what's happening around the world. That is the number one challenge for peer support, that lack of role clarity and understanding of who we are and what we do. And we developed our own role clarity training. So I do a lot of peer training. I do peer support training all over the country and in Australia. And I also do a role clarity training for non-peers. I tell them who we are and how we work, what the conflicts are, what the solutions are. But I suppose in a way, all those settings are really dominated by the medical model, by clinical and expert knowledge. And yet we come from that social space. We inhabit that social space. So when you look at psychosocial, we're the social. So we don't come from that clinical and expert knowledge. We have a largely different philosophy, and it's an ongoing conflict all around the world, but it does work. It just takes time, and it takes a lot of conversations. And when it works well. So training is key, even organisational training, external training, and that's one of the challenges that we found. So those key challenges for peer support, that lack of role clarity, lack of training, often isolation in the role. When you have only one or two peers working in an organisation where there's dominated by clinical voices who don't understand them, that can be really hard to hold yourself and stay true to the fidelity of a peer model. And it's ongoing.
Also, I've been doing this for 6 years professionally. I think as majority of the peer workers, we can say we've been doing this in one way or another, maybe for most of our lives, actually, without making it professional. But in my 6 years, when you talk about lack of role clarity, yes, there is a big gap in the system. They don't know how to articulate it or where to put it in most cases. But as I traveled along 6 years doing this in mostly similar settings with different groups, I also found it very difficult to clarify it for myself. sometimes I found myself confused at times about the aim, about what I bring to the table, about, sometimes I felt like, I don't know if the word is an imposter. It's like, just because I've gone through something, does that qualify me to support people? And actually, when the clients reflected back about how we're working in the room, then I found it very helpful. And I also made it part of our sessions as well. A little bit stop the mystery. So what I do is I tell straight away, I'm not an expert. We're equals in this room. We're exploring together. And I don't hold any magical, mystic wand. And I explain my questions as well as we go along. Sometimes I ask something and then I tell them why I'm asking it or where my mind is occasionally. So we're on the same page. What will be the things that, of course, there's a whole training about this, but what is the personal aspect of lack of role clarity, do you think? And what are a couple of ways to deal with it, would you say?
Yeah, look, a lot of that comes back to training and experience, and that was one of the problems we had here. There was very little peer support training. There was one or two little pockets of it that were available. One of them was the intentional peer support training, which is largely used internationally, but it's very conceptual and theoretical. And for a lot of people, that led to a lot of confusion. People didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. So we developed our own training, Peer Support 101, an introduction to lived experience peer support, and it's practice-based, and it covers all those main bases. And it means people can actually practice safely, understand the ethics and boundaries, the core elements of what they're supposed to be doing, and learn from experience as they go. So we've done 450 people in the last 2 years just here, and we're just inundated because we did a lot of research, as I said before, and we heard that consistently across the country. We need some training. We need some role clarity. We need some advocates, and there's a lot of work going on here. But I keep saying that to a large degree, peer support in New Zealand has been colonised, and I see that in other countries, or overtaken or driven by clinical voices who aren't peer support, who are telling us who we are and what we do. And I'm like, whoa, stop, get out. I could use other language, but I won't on here. You can guess what I might say to them. And I demand that our voice drives what we do. We know who we are, and in those interactions, Nil, it's really just about, I always teach people that rule number one for peer support is name it. Just name those things. As you just said, I'm not the expert, and anything that's awkward, we can just say that, whereas often clinicians can't. And rule number two is just use your lived experience. That's your skill. That's what you have in that setting, and be authentic. We don't have to pretend to be something else. And if we don't have the experience that someone else has, we just say so and be real. And that's where real, true relationship lies. And the peer role is relational. It doesn't sit in clinical and expert knowledge. It sits in relationship. It sits in social approaches. It sits in community, where that bridge between the treatment or the service provider and the real world, outside the bubble. And we bring that reality to it.
You talked about peer trainings happening in universities as well. You're providing lectures at universities in academia. How did it come? How established peer support in academia and then in the government? How did it start? Did someone advocated for it, or was it part of, as you say, colonization of peer support? Do you know?
Yeah, no, I think I'm sort of one of the pioneers of that here. And it was because I studied while I was working in peer roles. I have postgraduate and I have a master's degree in law.
Okay.
People say to me, so you're like a lawyer? I'm like, no, but I know the law. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I know it from a different side, and that has value. I'm currently doing a PhD in lived experience. So I started about 5 years ago. I was approached to come and do guest lecture spots into postgrad and addiction papers. And I go in and then bring a different perspective. I bring in their recovery capital and social approaches to recovery. I introduce the peer role. I say to them, so you guys are all training to be practitioners or clinicians. When you leave here, you're going to be working alongside peer support. Do you know who they are and what they do? And I bring that bit of role clarity. And I talk about how if they work together, we get better outcomes. And that's just grown. So I teach into the law faculty. I taught a class of lawyers yesterday, and on Monday, I'm lecturing to 20 judges in an area here. They've asked me to come in and talk to them about lived experience and the place of that. I actually sit on the board of corrections, the New Zealand Corrections Board, prison department, and bring a lived experience voice in there. And it's not just me. We are increasingly being listened to and sought after to bring that perspective, and people recognise that. I think a lot of the approaches that we've used for many years aren't really that successful, and we need to start listening. So it's really heartwarming, and it's a privilege to be invited into those spaces. But yeah, I go in and challenge them. And I don't know if you've heard of Professor David Best from Leeds Trinity University, but he's one of what I call the gods of recovery, and him and others. And that's what they promote. He'll tell you that peer support's where it's at. And he's not lived experience. He's an academic, a clinician, a researcher, and he will show you research that shows how effective peer support is. Him and many others around the world are incredible advocates for the value of what we do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So before moving on to another topic, I want to imagine how you do a PhD in lived experience. Under what major it sits in? How can you study lived experience in university?
Well,
how
I
does
suppose
that
my
happen?
master's in law, which sounds like a funny thing, but the thesis was on the role of addiction in criminal persistence and desistance, because particularly in addiction, there's nearly always a criminal justice element, because of drug law, and that was my journey. When we were young, we got drunk, we used drugs, we got caught, we needed money, we stole it, we got caught. It just got bigger and bigger until we're actually involved in serious offending and spending large periods in jail. And that's the journey of many people in addiction. So I broke that down in my thesis. But now, with a PhD, I want to really bring out what we're talking about here. What is the place of lived experience? What's the value? Why did 20 judges want me to come in and talk to them? Why did 30 lawyers want me to come in and hear my perspective in a legal studies degree? And why do postgrad papers want me to come in and critique that clinical approach? I think we're just sort of scratching the surface and starting to get that credibility, and people recognising the value of what we bring. David Best will talk about Project Match, the biggest addiction study ever done. 1,500 participants, one group looking at CBT and other approaches like that, one group looking at motivational interviewing and other interventions, and one group looking at 12-step and peer. The results were very clear. They were all just as effective. So Nil, why are we, peer support, minimised, tokenised, and dominated by the other two? That's not right. I always say we're increasingly in the room. They pat us on the head, and we're in the corner probably. And but it's the clinical approaches that dominate, and yet we have so much to bring. But it's because they don't understand us, and this is what I want to bring out in the PhD. Where are we so effective? Why? How? When? And really challenge that dominance, that paradigm of the current approaches.
Yeah. So I have two lanes to take in my mind, and I can't decide, so I'll just pick one and continue. So just to follow on from your question, why this is the situation. I do believe peer support brings inevitable democratization of power and service in any setting it appears. And that's why actually when you use the term colonization, I think it fits in. I think we can find a lot of parallels in any power struggle or fight around the world. And peer support prioritizes and puts lived experience on top, which cannot be shortcut
Mm.
by a diploma,
Mm.
by family ties, by wealth. You need to go through something in order to own this. You can't shortcut into it. And I think in the system we're living around the world, that's uncomfortable. That's not how you are taught to build a career. That's not how you are taught that you would acquire power or anything you would want. What do you think?
No, you're absolutely right. And you can't buy lived experience, so I think we come from a place of authenticity. And I often talk about you've really got to come back to values. And one of the exercises I do in our training is a Brené Brown exercise on values. And you pick 10 values from a huge list, and then you pick the top 3.
Mm-hmm.
I do that with peers, and I do it with the non-peers and the role clarity. Do you know that the values they pick are different? Not that they're bad values. The non-peers will have things like respect and honesty and family and beautiful values. The peers will often have faith, hope, gratitude, authenticity.
Interesting.
And the attitudes that come out of those values are things like passion and enthusiasm. That's what we bring. We like the energizer bunnies of this workforce. We're not looking at dollar signs or power or position. We just really want to be part of giving back and supporting people.
Yeah.
And it's different. So that values that we come from are often different from the values of others in the workforce.
I use value exercises in my sessions and with my colleagues in the team in away days as well. I recently started last year, so I don't have any collected observation on that. And I also want to underline, if there are non-peers listeners of this episode, just because you want power or wealth or you want to build a career and you've done well or not in the system, it's not wrong necessarily. It's about, because the system also gears you up for that. It doesn't invite you to think or question or challenge these things. And only when you live through a struggle or a challenge in some way regarding the power you hold in any setting, that you start to question and think about that and then find people who also have been there. So that also makes me think that, yes, I work in mental health, in peer support in mental health, but I find it ever more intersectional. I find it ever more socially connecting work. And maybe it feels a little bit limiting just to keep it in mental health. Is there any other execution areas, practice areas in New Zealand with peer support, apart from mental health and drug and alcohol services?
Yeah, look, we have what we would call indigenous approaches, let's say, so for Māori. And they have a different approach again. I've done our peer training with refugees. We have a group called Refugees as Survivors. Now, for them, Nil, their challenge in life isn't drugs or alcohol or mental health. It's stigma. It's the stigma of being the new person. And often for them, it's the person who's wearing the burqa or who has a name that is obviously not from here. And they stand out. And it's very difficult. So we train them as peers to support refugees coming in. We did our training at the University of Canterbury with the student navigators. So again, their challenge isn't necessarily a normal peer situation. They're supporting young people coming into that monster of tertiary education, which can lead to various mental health or substance use issues. So we have peer support in domestic violence, and I love this one. Who better to support women who are stuck in that world than someone who has survived that, And it's just getting bigger and bigger. People recognising their value of lived experience and the role that peer can play in that. In the prisons is particularly interesting, in the courts, because it's not really just about recovery, in terms of mental health or addiction. It's about what we call desistance, challenging that criminal thinking. that way of being that many of us just grew up in, and really challenging that and moving to what we call desistance from offending, from criminal thinking, being part of your community, thinking pro-socially, and peers are ideal for that. So we're really very effective in the criminal justice system. I go into prisons all the time and speak to people, and I nail them. I absolutely nail them. I'll go into a prison and I'll say, I spent years in this unit and they think I work there. It's when they realise you were one of us. I see that spark of hope go on in their eye. And they come and talk to me afterwards and say, hey, Dave, how do I? And I'll say, come and see me when you get out. I ran a peer training last week and I had 2 women who had just come out of prison. And they both stood up and said, I'm here because you inspired me, Dave. And I was like, what? And I didn't realise, but they'd heard me speak in the prison. And you said, come and see me. And they're on fire. They've just done our training. They're moving on to other studies. They're looking to get a job. They're just on fire. One of them's just spent 8.5 years there. And we're very effective in that space, because otherwise those people will be what we call othered, marginalised, punished, sanctioned, and maintained within that world of criminal justice and other forms of marginalisation.
So that beautifully brings us to the second lane I was going to take, potentially, 5 minutes ago, which is, you talked about someone who sparked hope in you. Would you be comfortable to share that story with us? A little bit of
someone lit the spark of hope, yeah.
Yeah. Like how did the change start in you?
Yeah, I'll give you the context. So I was doing 6.5 years for methamphetamine related offending, and I was very embedded in criminal activity, gangs, drugs. That was my life. And anyway, I when I'd go to the parole board, I'd say, okay, I'm all good now, and they'd say, no, you need help. I just didn't get it. Anyway, after going before the parole board for a few years and getting knocked back, I said, okay, I'll do your program. So they sent me to a drug treatment unit at a prison. And I went there intending to just nod and fly under the radar and get the tick for the parole board, and then just carry on doing what I was doing. And I was unpacking myself, and a guy came to the door who I knew. In all my teenage years in jails, he was always there. He was just like me, but he was different. He'd just completed the program, and he was there as a mentor, or basically peer support. He came to the door and said, hey, Dave, remember me? I was like, yeah. And he talked to me for 5 minutes now, and I can't tell you what he said. I just looked at him. He looked so well. He spoke. He was different. He had what I call a sense of peace about him. And he probably said things like, Dave, this program's really good. You're going to like it. It's changed my life. I didn't hear it. I just saw him, and I shifted. And I thought, I want what you got. And I got on board. And my life changed in that 5 minutes. That's the power of the peer. That's what we try and do. He lit the spark of hope in me. And I saw there might be another way. And it just grew from there. It's like the crack in the door. He opened the door. And the sun came through. And now I have what we'd call a life beyond my wildest dreams. I do work that I love. I travel around the world, studying. Yeah, it's a different life from what I was in. I lived a life of bullshit, of wearing masks, of fear and dread, and now I don't have that dread in my life. And that's the message I have for other people. So I think treatment's really good, but if you can't light that spark of hope, then people aren't really going to engage. But if you can motivate someone, I suppose I call it, everyone has what I'd call self-agency, the ability. We've all got it. But sometimes you need a catalyst, a motivator, or an activator. And I think peer support often is that person that just activates that self-agency in someone. It's like flicking a switch. They shift. And if you can do that, then you've done your job. Light the spark of hope.
Thank you for sharing that. We'll slowly coming to an end of a beautiful discussion. However, before we do close this episode, I want to talk a little bit about the gang culture. which I don't know anything about apart from the news I'm reading. I don't have any lived experience of that, apart from hearing secondhand reports, But it looks like it's a big epidemic in the UK, and I'm sure around the world. I'm from Turkey. I know it is a big problem there. And it starts very, very, very young, from the reports I'm reading. And I want to add another layer before I ask the question. So I'm from Turkey. I moved to the UK at the age of 28. And there always has been an assumption growing up in Turkey is, especially if you're on the westernized minded part of the society, let's say, if only I was born in Europe, right? If only I was born in the UK, it would be different because there are different opportunities. The culture is different. I'm more geared up for that. And then I moved here 11 years ago, and I have to say I love London. I love living here. I feel more belonging here for personal reasons. However, there has been a big disillusionment. And I always found it very fascinating that how come young people don't find anything else to do, right? It's that ignorant voice in my mind. Like, why? It's just there's this opportunity there, that opportunity, because I'm an immigrant who started from scratch. I'm constantly looking for opportunities for myself, and I found it very difficult. But of course, I come from a privileged background in Turkey. I graduated from a very good university. I was in a lower middle class family, but I wasn't poor. I had different kind of, and that geared me up to look for the opportunity. So now of course I'm still learning, but I'm in a more realistic aspect. So to people who have been involved in that life, or who know someone, a loved one, who is suffering in that environment, what would you like to share from your experience?
Well, I think from my experience, and I mean, I was in the youth justice, boys' homes, what we would call here, youth prisons. We're just adopting this tough on crime approach here. We call boot camps. So we put young people into prison-like military type situations. We did that in the 1970s when I was young. It didn't work. What it did was bring together a whole lot of disconnected, disaffected youth who built connections with each other, and we became each other's family. We were over here, we were Māori, we were Pacifica, we were European, we were from all parts of the world, and we were all lost, and we found strength coming together. So it's that I think for me the cause was that lack of connection with family, but in an ongoing sense, we need to find groups, activities, interests. People have to have those things. If they haven't, their interest will become crime and drugs, and the associated issues that come with that. So social connection is the key, and I'm involved in a range of initiatives with the World Health Organization at the moment, the Commission for Social Connection. People just through loneliness can end up in a gang situation and find themselves. I mean, I wasn't born a criminal, but I became one, because of the associations that I had and that disconnection with the community. I think that's the essence of it. And some people, that is their life. They are born into that. And when you mentioned intersectionality as a key factor, when you look at families that have the intersectionality of poverty, trauma, particularly trauma, deprivation, colonization, mental health, addiction, criminal justice within their family, how could they not end up in gangs or in prisons? And this is a societal thing. It's a community thing, and it's the place of our communities to address that. And it's a big issue. It's a big issue.
So as a last question, obviously we hopefully know where to find hope now, but there are also times we might find it difficult. Where do you look for hope, or where did you find it recently? Because you don't just find it once, right? It happens. You see something, you meet someone, and it sparks joy as well as hope. in you. Could you recount something that happened to you like that recently?
Well, recently, I suppose because of the work I do, particularly in those prison settings, I get that from when I see that hope in others. And but it's a difficult one. And we have a recovery cafe in our red light district, what I call our red light district. We call K Road. And we have a recovery cafe. So from Friday at 6 o'clock until Sunday at 6 o'clock, it becomes a recovery cafe called Haven, staffed by peer support, only peer support. Now, people come in, they can have a cup of coffee and it's something light to eat, but they come there for a different conversation. During COVID, we had 900 people come through one weekend. They were jam-packed on the streets. And you know, Nil, the busiest time was Sunday morning. Why Sunday morning? It's because they've been out Friday night, got drunk or wasted, Saturday, spent all their money, done something dumb, and then they're thinking, hey, I want to talk to someone that's like me. They want to get inspired. They want to find that hope. So we became a place of hope. We need more places like that now. We need places in the community, not just in treatment services or in prisons. We need them in the community so people can come there and connect with people like us, have a conversation and find hope. And of course, we connect people to services and do a whole lot of other stuff, but it's really just in that relationship. They can come and talk to someone different, not someone that's talking at them, but they can be with someone, someone real and, a real conversation.
Well, thank you so much for being here, for being a pioneer in peer support and accepting our invitation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Del. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Community of Excellence podcast. We hope these conversations help break stigma, build understanding, and remind you that healing is possible, especially when we come together. If you have been affected by anything in this episode, please know you're not alone. Support is available. You can speak to your GP or a mental health professional. For urgent mental health support in North London, contact the crisis line on 0800 151 0023. You can also call Samaritans anytime on 116 123. For free confidential support, you can text SHOUT to 85258. You can also call Calm Helpline on 0800 585858. Until next time, keep connecting and keep believing in the power of lived experience. This is more than a conversation, it's a movement.